This is Chris from Play Comics, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 215, Tron Legacy Movie Review. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Now this week we're taking a look at the 2010 sequel, Tron Legacy. But before we get to that, Derek, any pop culture that you've been able to squeeze in over the past week?
Yeah, I had a chance to watch 3 movies, which I will classify as the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Okay.
But we're going to save the good because, you know, the other one's kind of...
Got to work your way up
not
to that
great.
one, right?
Yeah. So
right,
we'll start with the bad. The bad, and I mean this is small b bad. The bad was a movie from 1989, a little classic starring Weird Al Yankovic called UHF.
That movie does suck.
Well,
Kramer's in it, isn't he? I remember that.
He is. Michael Richards has got a big role in it.
Yeah.
So I hadn't seen it in a long, like probably 20 years. And I'm a big fan of Weird Al's music, especially the stuff from the 80s and the early 90s. Love him a lot. And
hey, let's take him and stick him in a movie.
Yeah, why not? And so it was on the old 80s channel. So I recorded it a few weeks ago and thought, yeah, I'm going to watch this. And it had its ups and downs. I mean, it is what it is. It's starring Weird Al Yankovic, so you know it's not winning any Oscars. But I forgot how of its time it was, in the sense that Weird Al, being a satirist, and does parody of pop culture, the movie heavily focuses on that aspect of it from the late 80s. So there's a ton of 80s, especially late 80s references, movie references, music references, television references, general pop culture references, which, as someone who lived in the 80s, I got it. And a lot of it made me laugh because it hadn't been top of mind since the 80s. But I thought about how the movie holds up, or rather how the movie doesn't hold up, because so much of the movie is parody and satire of the pop culture of the time. So not a great movie. Definitely I would put it in, when we come to good, bad, and ugly, that was a bad one. Can't recommend the rewatch on that unless you're a huge Weird Al fan. The ugly. You may have recalled a while back I talked about the original movie, and now I had a chance to watch the sequel, and it's called Another Wolf Cop. Because Wolf Cop just wasn't good enough by itself. You needed a sequel called Another Wolf Cop from 2017, a small little Canadian movie. And my wife and I watched it. I said to her the other night, I'm like, let's just watch something off this digital recorder so we can start clearing it off. We're like, fine. And we're cycling through, and she's like, no, how about this? I'm like, no. And then she goes, okay, we're going to watch this Another Wolf Cop, and if it sucks, we're just going to erase it. I'm like, okay. We ended up watching the whole thing, and afterwards we're like, that was great.
Oh, really? You liked it?
It was exactly what you expect it to be when the movie's called Wolf Cop.
Well, you know, yeah. Wolf Cop 2, no less.
Yeah. Well, it's called Another Wolf Cop.
Another Wolf Cop.
Yeah. Not to be confused with Teen Wolf 2.
Yeah, Teen Wolf also.
As
I like to call it.
But anyway, it's exactly what you would expect from a movie about a police officer that's a werewolf. And it had a lot of, I'm going to put quotes around this, Canadian celebrities in it.
I ran into them, a bunch of them last episode.
No kidding. So the main villain of the movie is played by the main guy from the Murdoch Mysteries, a show I've never watched, but my wife watched for a little while. She's like, oh my God, that guy always plays such a nice, clean cut kind of guy. And it was kind of funny to see him as the villain. And cameo from Kevin Smith, because part of the movie was shot in Regina, Saskatchewan. And apparently when Kevin Smith was in Regina doing location shoots for his blockbuster film Moose Jaws, he was there, and they convinced him to do a little cameo. So he's in a few scenes. And it was pre-heart attack, so he's actually still pretty heavy in the movie. But it was fun to see him in there. And Gowan, singer of songs such as Strange Animal, and now the lead singer for Styx, also has a small cameo. And of course, they had to use the song Strange Animal during a scene where the wolf cop gets it on with another lycanthropy. And it's this very graphic and hilarious scene of people having, wolf sex.
Oh my.
Yeah, so in the good, bad, and ugly category, that one falls into ugly. Definitely not for everyone.
But you said you liked it.
I actually liked it more than I fully expected to. And they said in the sequel, in the credits, they're like, the Wolf Cop will return. And I read online that they're trying to get some money together to make a third part of it. So it's obviously got a little bit of a cult following. But anyway, we're going to circle back to the good. Mm-hmm. I watched for the very first time, having never, ever seen it previously, from 1950, starring Jimmy Stewart, Harvey.
Oh, God, that movie's fantastic.
When they talk about classics, and it was on Turner Movie Classics, and you think classic is sort of a big term. This movie, absolutely capital C classic. I totally understand and appreciate why you would call this a classic. It was outstanding. 10 out of 10. No question. Highly recommend to anyone who hasn't seen it. I knew a little about it, the whole idea that he's like got an imaginary friend that's a rabbit that nobody else can see. Because, it's referenced so much in other pop culture over the years. But oh my God, it was fantastic. It's based on a Pulitzer Prize winning play, which I had no idea that it had that kind of credentials behind it. Yeah. Jimmy Stewart was nominated for an Oscar, didn't win. Best Supporting Actress, whose name escapes me right now, was nominated and won for this film. It's super good. It was, movies from that age, the acting is sort of a different style than what you're used to today, which is a little bit odd. And the fact that it's adapted from a stage play, the movie really
they were all theater actors to begin with.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
the movie takes place in like 3 or 4 key locations. Obviously, because when it's a stage play, you can't have 20 sets built at once. But no, it was fantastic. If you haven't seen Harvey from 1950, and you can find it on one of your streamers or on a Turner Classic Movie, it is worth your 90 minutes. Watch it. You will be glad you did. I was shocked that it took me this long to see it. But yeah, so that was my good, bad, and ugly. Good was Harvey, bad was UHF, and ugly was Another Wolf Cop.
Nice. I remember the theater company that I used to work for in Niagara Falls. They did a production of Harvey. So that's where I became familiar with it and watched the movie. It was so good. As for pop culture for me, the last week, not a whole lot. I was flipping around the TV the other night. And have you ever heard of this station called Rewind?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It shows like old movies on it. Go figure, something I might like.
It shows movies usually from the 80s and 90s. So, which I guess is old from today's standard.
Well, I guess not for me. Meatballs was on the other night, so I'm flipping around. I see Meatballs, so of course I watched it. Now it was about 3/4 of the way through the movie.
Wait, Chris, had you ever seen it before?
Never seen it before. No. I hear the movie's pretty good.
That's the one about the Italian chef, the pasta maker, right?
Of
it's
course.
called Meatballs. Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same movie.
So when I turned it on, it was at the part where they have the competition with Camp Mohawk. So it was so good. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was my youngest son has been bugging me to go take him to the movies to go see Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Oh boy.
Like the first one wasn't bad enough.
Did you see the first one?
Oh yeah, I had to sit through it with him. He was like, "Oh, I want to get this movie, Daddy," and it was like on, I don't know, it was one of the streaming services or something. We watched it. My God, it was like a Yancey movie. It just totally.
Whoa. Some Yancey movies are fantastic.
Yeah, well, and some of them suck. And this one, fell into the suck category, let me tell you. So now I've got to go and see this dumb sequel, and I just keep putting him off. I'm hoping it comes out on the streaming services, so that way I can just put it on Netflix and check the hockey scores, on my phone. I'm a terrible dad. Oh, God. Oh, speaking of which.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
All right. Trying to keep the fact that Tron Legacy is about video games, right? Movie video games. I thought I'd do kind of a related topic for my dad joke this week. Okay. So, Derek, why is Super Mario so good at predicting the future?
Jeez, I have no idea.
He uses his Luigi board.
It's a good thing you got more than one life, or we would be done this podcast.
Oh, Uncle Luigi!
Just a bit outside.
Hey, bartender, Joe Boo needs a refill.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?
Vagisil.
I have a giant box of video cassette tapes.
Our parents love that movie. I'm like, oh, jeez.
And a working VCR.
That's all we got? one goddamn hit?
Terrible.
Play like maize, run like haze.
You may run like maize, but you hit like...
He's not the best color man in the league for nothing, folks. Okay, so our past few episodes have been focused on pop culture and movies and stuff from 1982. So Derek, it's your job around here to bring more of the millennial pop culture flavor to the show. So you had me watch the 2010 sequel Tron Legacy. Now, I know you said you wanted me to go back and watch the original Tron from 1982, but unfortunately, I didn't have time to do that. So I hope I can still get through this. I'm thinking you wanted me to have some sort of context, to watch this sequel.
Yeah. So my hope, I knew it was a tall order to get you to sit through two movies, especially, I know if I ask you to watch a newer movie and you're not immediately into it, then it becomes a big chore. But I thought, well, hopefully if you had time and you could have maybe watched the first one with your kids, because I was a kid when I saw it, and or at least for the first time, and I think it appeals to young kids that they would have enjoyed it. It's unfortunate you didn't get to watch it, but any movie, sequel or otherwise, should stand on its own. And if it is a sequel, it should at least fill in the blanks enough that you don't feel lost if you haven't seen the one that came before it. And I think Tron Legacy does a pretty decent job of that. There are definitely a lot of callbacks. So I actually made a point of watching the original. I watched the original Monday and then the sequel on Tuesday. So it was nice and fresh, one day apart. And they were both available on Disney Plus through the streaming, even though I have both of them on DVD and Blu-ray. I just watched them on the streamer. It was easier. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see on Disney Plus, it looks like Disney did a refresh of the original from 1982. They beefed up all the digital, not beefed it up and changed it, but you know how with a lot of older movies, they'll essentially clean it up. It looks like they really punched up the colors and sharpened up some of the graphics, and it looked fantastic, especially considering it's that old and some of the stuff is a little hokey or outdated by today's standards, but you got to keep in mind how advanced it was for its time. But I was very pleasantly surprised to see that the one that's available on Disney Plus, the original Tron, it was like a digitally remastered kind of thing, but not like the George Lucas kind of thing where they're going to change big parts of it with the computer. It looks like they just cleaned it up and made it like 4K.
Just kind of remastered it.
Yeah, I have a 4K TV and it looked spectacular. I've never seen it that good. It was awesome. And then I had a chance to watch Tron Legacy again. I watched it through Disney Plus, and again, the 4K came right through, and it looked spectacular on my TV. I had very, very pleasant viewing experiences with those two movies this week. I figure a lot of what you're probably going to say about Tron Legacy is a lot of style over substance, and it looks great, but maybe you didn't enjoy it as much. But the visuals alone for me were worth the watch, and I really, really enjoy Tron Legacy. I've seen it, probably more than 5, less than 10 times, and watching it again this week for this podcast, especially after watching the original right away, I was blown away by how good I thought it was, how good I remembered it being, and how much I enjoyed watching it again. So I'm a little curious, but probably not so curious to hear what you had to say. But I think there's a lot to talk about here. So
what makes
tell me about your Tron.
What makes you think I'm not going to like it? You just
it came out after
it
came out after 1989, so I figured that was going to be a big strike against it. But honestly, as someone who has studied film and done, when I was in school, I did a lot of film critiques and things of that nature. And I tend to try and watch movies with more of that critical eye. This one, in my mind, I really wish it had been available when I was a student, because there are so many different themes going on in this movie that you could write 20 different college level term papers on this, following up on different aspects of it. It's got religious connotation, it's got moral questions, it's got the whole light versus dark, the style and the use of light in the film, the use of color in the film. There's just so much that's in here that's more than just what do I see at face value. And for me, that always amps up a movie for me when I can watch it a second, third time and sort of start to pick out those little details and enjoy the fact that I can pick out those details. That's part of what in my mind makes a movie go from good to great or not so good to good. And so I'm kind of hoping, I know you have a lot of that same background, I'm kind of hoping that you may have enjoyed it and maybe because of that, because there was so many of these elements going on. So anyway, enough of me. What did you think of it?
As a college professor in my spare time when I'm not podcasting, of course, if I was a film professor and you submitted an essay on this movie, I'd probably flunk you. So I know you wanted me to watch the original first. I don't know if it would have helped me all that much. I mean, I guess it would give me some context. Maybe I've got better understand what's going on. I'll probably have a lot of questions throughout this episode.
Sure.
But I don't know if it would have made a ton of difference. The thing is, for a video game movie, and one that should have a ton of action in it, I found this movie to be boring.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I've never seen the original Tron, but the thing was, I did used to play the video game in the arcade, and I remember it was pretty hard. It had this really cool console. I remember it. The joystick was square and it glowed blue, and then there was the motorbikes, with the light streams.
The light cycles.
Oh, light cycles. That's what they're called. And there was this tunnel thing where you had to shoot at these colored blocks above your head. And there was, I think, a thing with spiders, and I think there was one with tanks as well. But so I think it was just the 4 levels, and then you just kept doing them over and over. They got harder and harder, usually by speeding up or whatever. So while the video game was pretty cool, from what I remember anyway, this sequel was kind of dumb. I can't comment on the original but I would hazard a guess to say it wasn't very good either. I mean, it doesn't have a huge nostalgic fan base. I mean, I think people remember the original for looking really cool, but overall, when I think of Tron from 1982, it kind of reminds me of Escape from New York. Remember when we did that movie?
Yeah.
And I commented on that. It reminds me of that in the sense that it's just this old movie that no one really liked all that much in the first place. I'm sure there's some diehard fans out there. I mean, there always is. But it's just not this hugely popular movie kind of overall. So that being said, why do you think they made a sequel? It's not like people were screaming for a Tron sequel back in 2010, were they?
I think there's always been a desire to take the groundbreaking technology that they used for 1982's film, which was cutting edge at the time, and bring that forward with the advancements in technology and say well, this is what we did at the time with the tools we had. Here's what we're going to do now with the tools that are available 30 years later. And from my understanding is that the idea of the Tron sequel had been kicking around for quite some time, and there was a lot of issues as to why it wasn't made sooner. But I was happy to see this. I think it definitely tried to lean on that nostalgia factor to get people into the theater. But I also just think that they got a good cast together, and it was an interesting concept of a real person going inside the computer, inside of this artificial video game world, and to see where it's going to go. And this is one of those movies, normally I don't watch trailers, but this is one of those movies, when I saw the first trailer, I was just blown away. And I remember that being a big part of the ad campaigns for this was, you may not know you wanted to see the sequel, but look at how slick this looks. And I was all in. I saw it in the theater and I loved it.
I don't know. I think these Hollywood types, it's almost like, I know, let's make a sequel that no one's asking for based on a movie that bombed back in 1982 and doesn't even have a cult following. That sounds like a good idea.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily a fair statement here. I don't think you can say that no one wanted it, and I don't think you can say that it doesn't have a cult following, but I get where you're coming from.
So the movie stars Jeff Bridges and Jeff Bridges and Jeff Bridges. So it was made for a budget of $170 million. It just made back its budget domestically. Now, it did end up making money on the worldwide box office receipts, but it finished 20th overall at the year in the U.S. box office. It was outgrossed, by the way, by such luminaries as The Other Guys, Shutter Island, and Salt. Now,
those are all good movies.
I haven't heard of any of them.
Salt was actually just on TV this week. My wife was watching it again. She really likes that one.
By the way, looking at the list of movies from 2010, another banner year for Hollywood. Sequel after sequel after sequel. There's Toy Story 3, Iron Man 2, Harry Potter, Twilight, Shrek Forever After, and then this stupid movie. And the movies that weren't sequels that year were remakes. There's The Karate Kid, Clash of the Titans, A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's no wonder I like Gen X movies so much, because they didn't suck. You know, now get off my lawn, you dumb kids.
I got news for you, buddy. This movie didn't suck either.
Oh, man. Well, one thing I will say that I thought was cool, when the movie opened up, I actually had some high hopes because when they showed the Disney logo at the beginning, it's the Disney castle at the Magic Kingdom, you know, and the castle's all glowing blue, like in the style of Tron, which I thought was pretty cool, you know, but then things just kind of went downhill from there. Like there's the shot of the city skyline and it's CGI'd. Like, oh man. And the movie opens up in 1989 with Jeff Bridges, but he's CGI'd, like to make him look like younger, you know, like it's 1989. But to me, it comes off like Grand Moff Tarkin and Princess Leia in Rogue One. You know, like it's all like this fake and crappy CGI. And then they try and fool you by like keeping him in the shadows. And he's like behind the window frame and all that. But for me, it took me out of the movie right away. I don't know. I'm a crotchety old man, so what the hell do I know?
Well, I didn't have any issues with it, and I didn't have any issues with the people in Rogue One either. I thought that it did exactly what it needs to. I was fine with it.
I thought it looked like crap. When the movie opened up too, there's the grandparents. Did you recognize them by any chance, the actors?
Well, I know the guy who was the grandfather. He was on the remake of Battlestar Galactica as a crotchety old doctor, but I know he's a big Canadian actor. I don't know where else he's from.
They're both Canadian actors, and they're both from Winnipeg. So the grandfather, his name was Donnelly Rhodes. He was Doc Roberts from Danger Bay.
Sure.
You never watched Danger Bay, the Canadian show?
No, I'm aware of it, but I never watched it.
And then, but he was on Battlestar Galactica, the remake. And then Belinda Montgomery played the grandmother. She was Doogie Howser's mom.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I recognized those two actors right away. I thought it was good. I have a question for you. So the original film, again, I'm going to have lots of questions because I didn't have the chance to watch the original. In the original from 1982, does the whole movie take place inside the computer with the blue lights, or are there scenes in real life?
About half of it.
Oh, only about half of it. Oh, wow.
Because it's like this. It's the first part is set up, and then the guy in the first one, the guy is brought into the computer against his will, and like then it's about him trying to escape, and then whereas in this one, he inadvertently puts himself into the world.
So the kid, he goes into this old arcade, or like this old warehouse with arcade games and whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if I had that, I would never come out of that place ever.
Yeah. And that location is right out of the first movie. They recreated the set in its entirety.
By the way, I do have an arcade game in my basement, thanks to the good folks over at Digital Leisure in Toronto. And the thing is that you can add games to it. By the way, I just added Mat Mania. It's a wrestling game.
I was going to say, is it a wrestling game?
Yes, I used to play it every day at lunch when I was in high school. And my kids actually like playing it too. The high score, we got the game, the high score, like the generic high score when you get it, is 35,000. And I beat it with 167,000. I still haven't lost the touch, I tell you. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so in the arcade in this movie, they're playing these old 80s tunes, like Journey and like Sweet Dreams by the Eurythmics.
Yeah.
It felt forced. It felt like they're trying to be all nostalgic, but okay. So
those were both used in the original. Again, it's that they're just leaning on the familiarity, if you are aware of it.
But the thing is, though, like Tron, the original wasn't all about the 80s, though. It was about like these glowing blue guys in a computer, right? So
but it was about the 80s because it took place in the 80s, and it was about the video game revolution,
I guess.
But if you
I have a question about this computer world. So is it just like some computer world where you have to go and like do battles to stay alive? Because at the beginning, CGI Jeff Bridges, he says he created a world where information is free. And then he's like, you know, but it seemed to me like it was just like from the original, at least based on the arcade game I used to play, it's a world where you just fight battles on like speeder bikes, you know, with like coming out of the back end.
No, and as he says in this movie, you know, later on when they meet the real Flynn, as he says, Clue doesn't have the ability to create programs. He has to he can destroy them, or he can take them over and repurpose them. So it seemed to me like the games was the best way for him to get rid of programs he didn't want, or find ones that were strong enough to be reappropriated into something more useful to suit his purposes.
I know you're not a big video game guy, but I got a question for you. Do you know, is there a new video game for this new movie?
I have no idea.
Like
I'm
I
sure
said,
there is, but if there is, I am not familiar with it.
Yeah, because like I said, in 82 there was that arcade game, you know, and I know arcades don't exist anymore, but oh man, kids these days are missing out. Going to the arcade was so cool. Okay, so in this movie, the kid goes to the computer world, and he meets young CGI Jeff Bridges.
Yes,
and at this point, it's almost like CGI rotoscoping. You know, like it's like him, but they use like CGI to enhance him and change his appearance. So I don't know. The bikes. I want to ask you about the bikes too, with the light coming out the back end. Would you call them again?
Light cycle.
Light cycle. The thing was, I noticed is they're on different levels, and I guess maybe that's the twist now, because they used to always be on the same flat surface, at least in the video game that I used to play.
Yeah,
and you had to try and cut off the bad guy and like make him crash. You know, but
yeah, I think in 1982 that was a limitation of the technology. So again, with the new tech, it's like let's show it off. And the floor was transparent, so you could actually see down to the lower level.
Oh, right. So then the kid goes up like a mountain with a girl, and he meets old Jeff Bridges, like nowadays, like beard old guy Jeff Bridges, like as opposed to Grand Moff Tarkin, Jeff Bridges. But the thing is, okay, so I'm going to go back to this. This CGI Jeff Bridges doesn't even look like Jeff Bridges. He looks like Chris Pratt. Isn't that the guy's name? What was that the movie you made me watch where he wakes up J-Law in space?
Yeah, that was Passengers.
Yeah, that is who CGI Jeff Bridges looks like in my mind when I watch this. Right. I don't know.
I didn't think so, but again, you're entitled to your opinion.
So I know you wanted me to watch the original, first before I got it. But what I have gotten out of this movie, watching that one, because I don't think it would help. I think it would just make me hate this movie more. I don't know.
No, I just think.
What am I missing out on by not seeing?
No, I think it would have just provided a little more context of sort of seeing this is where it was, this is where it was, and this is where it is. Like you would get a greater sense of how much of a step forward this was from the old one by seeing both of them back to back.
One thing I noticed, when people get killed in this world, they shatter into a million crystal pieces. Did that happen in the original too?
They just sort of phased out. Again, okay. It was a limitation of the technology.
And the CGI and stuff. No word of a lie. At one point, my wife comes in. Luckily, she was in the other room watching something else. Maybe Yellowstone. Remember the show? So anyway, so she comes in. She's like, oh, you're watching. What's this movie all about? It was an hour and 23 minutes into it, and I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't understand what was happening at all. Now, I'm going to be honest, full disclosure. I was so colossally bored that I was just checking the hockey scores. So I got to be honest, this was the closest that I've come so far to turning off a movie for this podcast. Wow. I got close in the past. We watched The Lobster, and I remember Moon and Interstellar. There's been a few movies I've been subjected to here. I almost turned off, but this was probably the closest. I literally had my hand on the remote, and it was like Greg when he was on the show last week. He's like, there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, and he's like, turn it off, this sucks. It was like, Chris, if you turn this off, Derek will be so disappointed, he'll never forgive you. Remember that scene in Animal House with the animal or the angel and the devil? That was the best ever. I just keep going back to my old movies. I have a question for you. The big kind of black and red spaceship thing, it reminded me of like a ripoff of Disney's The Black Hole. Wasn't there like a big robot in that movie that just looked like that thing?
I don't remember, but this one is an updated version of the one from the original movie. It's slicker. The shape and the color is exactly the same.
Because it totally reminded me of that black hole creature. I thought maybe Disney was doing like a crossover, or something. It worked for the Avengers, This whole movie confused me. So near the end, the sun goes and stands in the light beam and holds his hands up. That's the image from the original movie poster. If I remember, from 82.
And the poster for this one, the two posters, I'm actually got them up on my screen here looking at them side by side. They're very similar, yeah. Again, when you're marketing a movie, you want to play on what's familiar. So they set it up to remind people of the original.
I'm sure it had some sort of significance. I mean, God knows what it was, but I'm sure it meant to reference something. Like what was going on there?
Well, they talked about how that was the input-output tower, how that beam of light represented how information was getting in and out of the computer. So that was basically how he got out.
I guess my thing is, for one of these big splashy CGI movies, nothing really happens.
What did you expect to happen?
I don't know.
Like, it sounds to me like you had completely unrealistic expectations of what you were getting into. Well, and when it didn't meet those expectations, you said, this is dumb. It's watching a movie and going, I think this is going to be a comedy, and it's a sad drama. And you're like, Schindler's List is the worst movie ever. I didn't laugh at all. And I expected this to be a comedy. Well, that doesn't mean the movie's not good. It meant that you went into it with the wrong mindset. And then when you're like, well, if they don't laugh soon, I'm going to start playing on my phone. Well, I didn't hear any funny dialogue, so this movie's terrible. And it's like, you got to really pay attention to what's going on. You got to try and go into these with a little bit more of an open mind.
I guess, the frame of reference that I had going into it was the video game that I used to play on the arcade back in the day. And there was like a lot of like cool stuff going on in the video game. So I guess I expected like something of action to be in this movie or something. I don't know. And then at the end, that kid, he goes back to like modern times after he goes up in that, what do you call it? That light beam?
Yeah, it's an input-output tower. So
he goes back and he's with a girl on a motorcycle, and even the city is CGI'd. I was just like, oh man! But he says to her,
really, I mean, I didn't even notice that. If it was CGI'd, it was good enough that it fooled me.
I don't know. I noticed it. It jumped out to me, and then he's like, I want to show, or she says, or something, I want to show you something, and they ride on the motorcycle for a bit, and then the credits start to roll, and
yeah.
On one hand,
to show her the sunrise. She had said she'd never seen the sun. So he's like, I want to show you something. He was bringing her where she could see the sunrise.
Oh, because I was like...
Saw her looking up at the sun and closing her eyes like, oh my God, like I can feel the warmth on my face.
Yeah, I guess on one hand, I was like confused. But then on the other hand, I was like so happy it was over. So then I could check the hockey scores without this movie interrupting me. So I don't know. I didn't understand it. Like, I didn't understand what was going on. I was like... the end of the movie came and I was like, what's this final scene about? What did I miss? What's he going to show her? Like, what could I have done with 2 hours of my life other than this? I had a lot of questions on it. So.
Well, I like this movie a lot. I think it's visually spectacular. The way that they've played with the light and the shapes. There was a little documentary on the Disney Plus where they talked to the production people, and they were saying how the director of this movie, before he became a movie director, was an architect, and how that helped him visualize what he wanted in a certain way. And when they spoke to the design team that actually built the sets and came up with the computer generated things, they said like it was interesting to have a director who came with certain ideas and a certain view of how, like a certain perspective on things that they were not used to getting from a movie director. And they felt that really helped shape the movie, both figuratively and literally. And like, that was part of what I love so much watching this again this week. Is just, it's so visually stunning. I remember when we did Ready Player One, you said, well, there was, a lot of style, not a lot of substance. And there was a lot of computer generated stuff. And it was just like, done for the sake of being done. And that sort of rang in the back of my mind is Chris going to have that same kind of criticism? But if this to me was 10 times better than that, just the way it looked. And I wanted to talk to you about the music.
Okay.
So the score for this was done by the new wave band. We call them new wave, Daft Punk.
Oh yes.
So
I didn't know that. I like Daft Punk.
So they were actually in the movie. There's a scene where they go into the end of line club. And when they're going up the stairs, he says something like, let's change the mood in here for a while. And it cuts to the scene of there's two guys wearing like stormtrooper style helmets behind a glass. That's the Daft Punk, the two guys, because they always have those stylized helmets on when they make public appearances. So it just fit perfectly into the Tron world.
Like they were the DJs in that.
They were the DJs.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
The score for this was done by Daft Punk. It definitely, if you know that and you're familiar with their work, there's no mistaking it. Their style is super distinct. After I saw the movie in the theater, I immediately went out and bought the soundtrack, which is like the musical score. The just the style of it was it was just the perfect music for the visual. I thought that the visuals and the audio just meshed so well together.
When I was a DJ, I used to always play a song by them called "One More Time."
Yeah,
back in the 90s, like it was pretty popular. And then they had a song called Da Funk, I think it was. Yep. And the video was like a guy wearing this like dog.
The dog suit,
mask.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. And they also did Around the World.
Yeah. They have really good and creative videos. I rember Yancey talking about Around the World being one of his favorite music videos of all time. So that I think really added to it. Just the vibe that they created with the audio, I felt really helped set the tone and set the mood. The light, the use of light and dark, the use of the red contrasted against the whitish blue. One of the things that I don't necessarily know if they explained it clearly enough in the sequel, but from the original was like part of the premise of the original is the computer world. There was the master control program, and it was basically a computer virus, an intelligent computer virus that would co-opt other programs to make itself stronger and smarter. And anytime the master control program took over another system, it became that red light, and anything that was free and not under the immediate control of the master control program was blue in the original ones. And so in this one, they've carried forward that theme of the color, but they didn't really explain that. I mean, it's pretty clear that the reds are the bad guys and the whites are the good guys, but that was something that they carried forward from the original movie, the idea that Clue, representing the villain, has his idea, and as he takes control of things and as he co-ops these programs, the ones that are represented by people, they go from being white to being red as they are sort of brought into the fold. And I'm sure there's all sorts of symbology around the color schemes and such, but again, it's the visual aspects, the colors. It's the idea of the good versus evil, the light versus dark. In this case, it's the red versus white. And there's so many like biblical allegories going on here around, he's the creator and they literally worship him. And this is the son of the creator. This is the second that you have the son that was cast out in Clue, who's just trying to strive to do the best. He's the ruler in hell. He's like a devil figure. Whereas, Jeff Bridges' character is like the God figure. And then the son, this is his only son, comes in to save the world. And, there's a lot of this sort of religious allegory going on in this movie if you dig deep, which is part of why I was so why I thought about the idea of if I was a college student, I could write 20 different papers about this, because there's just so many different things you can latch onto to analyze from that critical point of view. But it's unfortunate you didn't pick up on most of that, or that you didn't care for it.
So maybe I wouldn't flunk you if you handed in that essay. That sounds all right. Again, I'm not having seen the original, but I've seen like lots of images from the original. And one of the things was like, it really seems stylistic, the one from 82. And yes, the special effects are not as good back then or whatever. I argue that they're better back then, but they're not the same. But the thing is, the old movie really popped, like with the blue costumes and lights and all that stuff. Whereas I found this one, it didn't really pop as much. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't as much blue light. It was more gray, or I don't know. But it's just, I feel like the imagery I have in my mind of the original film doesn't add up here. It's like it just doesn't capture as much of the original as I wanted it to.
Well, and I think that's part of the point of it, though, is that it represents in this artificial computer generated world, it's been running on a completely self-contained system. Like it's clearly not connected to the internet because it's from the late 80s. And this is the idea is, well, what would have happened if you had generated this computer program, this computer world in the late 80s, and you had left it for 20 years to just evolve on its own? And this is what it's come up with. So yeah, it's that dark, that bleak, the rain, the mist. It's like, it's not an idealized, perfect, sunny, bright everything. It's those muted tones and muted colors to represent the the conflict that's happening and the uncertainty and the chaos that's going on. And Jeff Bridges' character refers to chaos in a number of scenes where in his dialogue, and he talks about, sometimes making a choice versus not making a choice, or removing yourself from the equation by not participating in the conflict. Like, these are all interesting concepts that are really they're in this movie if you look for them. And again, that's part of what I love about this, because I've seen it a lot of times. I can really get something new out of it every time I watch it.
So I'm just trying to do some quick math here. I'm trying to figure this out. So the original movie happened in 1982, and this movie opens up in 1989.
Yes,
if I remember correctly. And so when you've got Grand Moff Tarkin, Jeff Bridges going on there, and so he's there with his kid, but this movie came out in 2010.
2010. Yep.
So we're talking 28 years
from the original. Yeah, that sounds right. Yes, 28 years.
So, but the kid looked like he was 19. So how does that add up?
Well, I think he was supposed to be older than that. He talks about how he dropped out of college and he's been doing things. So I think he's supposed to be in his early to mid 20s, like maybe 23, 24, 25 ish. And I think that at the beginning, the actor that played the young Sam, I think, is probably older than the character was supposed to be. Like, I always got the sense that because in 1982's film, Kevin Flynn is not married, doesn't seem to have a girlfriend, doesn't seem to have any children, doesn't seem to have any responsibility in any way that would imply that he is a parent. So my guess would be that between 1982, when the first movie came out and the events of the first movie occurred, and 1989, when we see this kid, the kid was supposed to be born somewhere in that window. So let's say he was even born at the beginning of 84. That still only would have put him 5 or 6 years old in that scene. I think the actor, the child actor in that scene, was probably closer to 10. So I think that might be why it sort of threw you a bit. That's sort of threw me the first time I saw it too. I'm like, how much time is supposed to have passed here? Yeah.
So one thing that I often rail against with these movies compared to the old movies is the rewatchability factor. So I always think that Gen X movies, you can watch them over and over and over again. And not having seen the original, but I'm assuming you could probably watch it more than once. This one just, again, is another newer movie, a millennial film, that doesn't strike me as being imminently rewatchable. But you've watched it more than once, obviously.
I was going to say, I got to disagree with you tremendously on that statement. I think this movie is immensely rewatchable, if for no other reason than just the visual aspects and the music from Daft Punk. Whether you're not really into the story, or you're not really think that the performances are as good as they could be, which I think the story's great. I think the performances are great, but visually it's stunning. And I think if you actually sat down and watched it a second time, you would probably pick up visual aspects you missed the first time through. And I think for some of the things I was just talking about, there are a lot of really strong themes that run through this movie. And if you have seen it once and sort of know where it's going, you're going to pick up on those a lot more clearly the second and third time through. And you're going to find it's like a movie like The Sixth Sense, where there's the big dun dun dun, here's the reveal at the end. And then when you watch it a second time and you're like, oh my God, all the clues are right there. But if you don't know where it's going, you don't necessarily pick up on them in the same way. Not that this movie, I think, is as good as The Sixth Sense, and not that it has that kind of, oh my God, this is how it ended kind of surprise ending, because it doesn't. There's no real surprise on how this ends. It's Disney. You know how it's going to end. But once you sort of know where the story goes and you watch it a second time, there's definitely a lot of value in that second watch. So I think this movie is immensely rewatchable.
I have 3 questions for you to kind of wrap things up with.
Sure.
So the first one is, so you mentioned rewatchability. Which one do you think is more rewatchable? The 1982 original or this one? This one.
This one. I think the 1982 original, you watch it once, especially if you've never seen it before. You watch it once and you go, oh, okay, I can see what they were doing. But I don't think you would want to go back and watch it again, because you're like, I've seen it, I've done it, I get where it's going. But where this one, I think there's just so much more going on. This one, my answer would be this one for sure.
So that probably ties into my second question, which is, which one have you seen more times?
Oh, this one for sure. The original I've probably seen. I don't think I've seen it more than 5 times. I think 5 is probably about right. I think this week I would say was my 5th time. But this sequel, I would say, like I think I said at the beginning, between 5 and 10, but probably closer to 10. And there's definitely sequences that I have watched Like, I actually had 10 or 12 movies on my phone for a long time. I just kept forgetting to delete them. And I can remember a couple of times on the subway ride home, I'd be like, well, I got 20 minutes till my stop. And I knew I had Tron Legacy was one of those 12 movies. And I'd be like, I'm going to watch the sequence where they're doing the motorcycle, they were doing the light cycle races, because it's about a 10-minute sequence. Or I'd find a sequence of the movie that I thought, oh, this is a neat one where I can just, enjoy the visuals. So start to finish, I've definitely seen the second one more. And I've definitely seen more of sort of the rewatchable bits, way more.
And then I guess the last question that I have for you before we wrap up, are they planning on making another one? It's Hollywood. They probably are.
Well, yes and no. So they were originally planning to make a sequel to this almost immediately. It was partly based on how well this one did financially. And as you said off the top, it sort of broke even in North America and then it made more money overseas, which is usually the way a lot of these movies work. But apparently there was some sort of contract behind the scenes where Disney had another movie that was coming out around this time. I think it came out 6 months later, and it had George Clooney in it. I think it was called Tomorrowland, if I remember correctly. It's a Disney one. And the fate of that movie was closely tied to this movie, where it was sort of a package deal where they were like, if this one breaks even and the other one breaks even, then we'll go ahead and make a Tron part 3. And that Clooney one flunked big time. It was a huge flop. It was a ridiculously expensive movie that failed miserably. I watched it years later and it was awful. And because it didn't do what they needed it to do financially, they were like, well, that discretionary money that we were going to use to make Tron 3, forget it. We're going to make something else. Now, I have been reading that there is still a desire to do a third part based on the story that's been established at the end of this. Whether or not they get around to doing it anytime soon, I don't know. Because if you recall in this one, in one of the very first scenes in the boardroom, they have Cillian Murphy is in it for like 2 minutes. And he, at the time, was a pretty big actor. And he's gone on to he's the main guy in Peaky Blinders, and he's been in a lot of good movies. He was in the Batman movies with Christopher Nolan directed. So like he's got a pretty reasonable resume, and he's a very talented actor. So I think the intent was to have him be a big player in the third part. Well, it's been 12 years. I don't know if he's necessarily the guy they're going to want to bring back. And same with these actors that are in it. Like Jeff Bridges is not getting any younger if you want to bring him back. Olivia Wilde's now doing a lot of directing, so I don't know if she'd want to be a performer. And the kid who played Sam Flynn, like I don't think I've seen him in anything else other than this. So, again, it's unfortunate sometimes the circumstances of timing. I would hate to think that they would just straight up reboot it from scratch, but if there's money to be made on a franchise, yeah, exactly. Sometimes they're like, well, this is the easier way to do it. They just recast everybody and away you go. But
All right. So on that note, let's have some
fun with Caveman.
Derek, it's time to play a little game that we have around here that I like to call Pick the Flick. Pick the Flick. Yeah, pick the flick. You get the synopsis, then pick the flick. You get the year, pick the flick. So as per the rules of the game, as you could tell in the song, I'm going to give you the year and the synopsis, and then you just have to guess the title. Or should I say, pick the flick.
Okay.
So the common thread, all the movies this week have to do with video games.
Oh, boy.
Just
okay.
like Tron, all right? I know you're not a big video game guy, but I think you can probably do pretty well.
There was a lot of terrible movies made off of video game IP, so...
I think you're going to do pretty good on these ones.
Okay.
I've tried to keep it simple for you, okay? So 1984, a local high school student finds himself transported to another planet after conquering a video game, only to find out it was just a test. He was recruited to join a team to defend their world from an attack.
Is this the one we did on our podcast not too long ago, The Last Starfighter?
Sure was. Congratulations.
Nice.
Okay, 2018. Right up your alley. When the creator of a virtual reality called Oasis dies, he makes a posthumous challenge to all Oasis users to find his Easter egg, which will give the finder his fortune and control of his world.
Yep, we just talked about this. Ready Player One.
Told you were going to do good. Okay, 1993. Two Brooklyn plumbers must travel to another dimension to rescue a princess from the evil dictator King Koopa and stop him from taking over the world.
Yeah. It goes back to your very lame dad joke, Super Mario Brothers.
I tie everything in, to make your life easy. Okay, 2001. A video game adventurer comes to life in a movie where she races against time and villains to recover powerful ancient artifacts.
What was the year again?
2001.
2001.
She.
Wow. That doesn't even sound familiar. I have no idea.
It's Lara Croft, Tomb Raider.
Oh, sure.
Okay. 1995. 3 unknowing martial artists are summoned to a mysterious island to compete in a tournament whose outcome will decide the fate of the world.
Was that Mortal Kombat?
Sure was. Congratulations. All right, 1994. Colonel Guile and various other martial arts heroes fight against the tyranny of dictator M. Bison and his cohorts.
Jeez. I don't know. That sounds like a blockbuster special, believe me, but no, it doesn't sound familiar.
Street Fighter.
Oh, sure.
Whatever. Okay, here's one. 2021. A bank teller discovers that he's actually an NPC inside a brutal open world video game.
Yeah, I just watched this again a couple of weeks ago. Free Guy.
Yeah, starring your boyfriend.
Yep. Have you seen it yet? It was really good.
My kids were watching and I watched part of it. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. Ryan Reynolds playing Ryan Reynolds, of course.
Yep.
But okay, 2010, same year as this movie. Okay, in a magically realistic version of Toronto, a young man must defeat his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes one by one in order to win her heart.
Right. This was Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
I actually went to see that movie in the theater, and I thought it was quite good. It was quite
I don't remember it that well. I remember it had a really big cast, and it was based on a very popular comic book series. But
of all guys to play the part, that guy was just great. Okay, 2008. These last ones are getting a little bit harder. 2008. Coming together to solve a series of murders in New York City are a police detective and an assassin who will be hunted by the police, the mob, and a ruthless corporation.
Wow. It almost sounds like Batman. I don't know.
Max Payne.
Sure.
Whatever.
Never heard of it.
All right, 1999. Blair, a fighter pilot, joins an interstellar war to fight the evil Kilrathi, who are trying to destroy the universe.
Oh, jeez. I had no idea.
I'd never even heard of this. Wing Commander.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember the video games when I was at university. One of my roommates was like playing Wing Commander nonstop.
All right, last one. 2022. When the manic Dr. Robotnik returns to Earth with a new ally, Knuckles the Echidna. This lead character and his new friend, Tails, is all that stands in their way.
Jeez. Is it the stupid one you were talking about at the beginning? The Sonic 2, Sonic the Hedgehog Part 2?
It's the one I keep putting off from taking my son to go see. I am the worst dad ever.
I was going to say Detective Pikachu, but I know that came out a couple of years ago.
Oh, man, I am the worst dad. Okay, so next episode, Derek. So it's time for another pop culture fantasy draft. Oh, I like those. Those are fun. So it's your turn to pick a year from the 80s. Now, so far, we have done 1981, 82, 84, 85, and 89. So which of the remaining years do you want to draft from?
All right. I am a firm believer that whoever gets the number one pick for most of these drafts has got a heavy favoritism here. And so I figure, you know what? Let's just lean right into that. I want to go with a year where the number one movie should just cement the victory no matter who does what. And I'm going with 1980 because someone's getting Empire Strikes Back, and it's going to be me. I need that first pick, buddy.
Going all the way back to 1980. What's your?
Yep.
You're more like the later 80s guy, so this should be interesting. You're right. You know, when you think of 1980, it's like The Empire Strikes Back. If you get first pick overall, you're taking Empire Strikes Back. No
if you don't take it, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. And I think whoever gets the second pick is going to be coming from a position of you know, they're going to just have so much against them. They're going to be fighting uphill. But I mean, luck of the flip, luck of the draw.
It'll be interesting to see. I'd be interesting to see whoever gets the first pick is taking Empire Strikes Back, no question.
Oh, for sure.
But it'll be interesting to see if the other person can come back from that and kind of, you know, I think they can. It'll be interesting to see. We're going to find out because
I haven't been able to on 3 other drafts behind Ghostbusters, E.T., and Back to the Future.
Well, that's on you. You know,
Ghostbusters was on me. That was the very first one. But
so next week we're going to come back and we're going to draft a team from 1980, which is going to be comprised of 3 movies, 3 TV shows, 3 songs, and 1 personal pick from that year. That should be a lot of fun. So make sure you come back and join us for that. And so until then, this is Chris McBrien on behalf of myself, our producer Sloth, and Derek Meyer saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.